In the near future, we will all be in a state of doom as a new era of economic breakdown is set to begin. This should not be something that we should laugh off, because very soon the quality of life for almost everyone is going to reduce. Economists on their side are trying to ensure that this doesn't happen by trying to find out the best possible solutions to the incoming economic trouble that is set to hit the world in the future. So what are these major economic threats that could lead to such a scenario? Economite today brings you great answers to that question. We therefore urge you to keep calm and continue watching this video till the end so that you get to know the real facts behind the economic pandemic that is set to hit soon. Dr. Nouriel Roubini, once a senior economist in the Council of Economic Advisers for the Clinton administration, a senior advisor to Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, a professor at Yale, and a consultant to the World Bank Federal Reserves and the IFM, has warned us on what is coming. And from what it sounds, it seems to be very big. He even listed to us the 10 major threats that will consume our economic prosperity in the few years to come. And that is why we came up with this video, to give you a recap of what he discussed earlier in an interview. But before that, let's head back and discuss something about globalization. We all have heard about the term globalization. It is something that we know isn't new to you. Even if you missed your business classes, you couldn't have forgotten to stick it into your brain. For starters, globalization is a process by which countries open up to one another, building relationships based on the transfer of goods and services, labor, technology investment, and information. By sharing these resources around, all of the countries involved in globalization can become wealthier overall. Let's say, for example, the Netherlands invents some new technology that allows twice as much food to be grown on the same piece of land, but they can share that technology with all the other countries in the world, and suddenly the global supply of food doubles. Well, in the end, this would actually be great for all the other countries that benefited from receiving this technology, that they wouldn't have otherwise had in a totally closed-off economy. Not only will it benefit the world alone, but also the country that has made it. So, if such a country sells that technology, it could make more money than it would have by just farming and selling its excess food separately. They can also use this money to import other stuff so that everybody ends up with more resources overall. Again, one of the biggest reasons why countries like China, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea were able to grow so rapidly over the past few decades is that they did not need to create everything from scratch. China didn't need to invest in modern electrical grids and production lines. They just imported the technology from countries that already had the expertise in making the needed tools. So they got straight into business making cheap consumer goods to kickstart their economy. Enough about that. Let's now get back to today's topic. From the globalization we just talked about, we can confidently conclude how much it gives a comparative advantage. And actually, it is a big reason why the world has become so much wealthier. Now, this is a trend that has never lived to its success, because the process is starting to reverse, and now the world is heading towards a deep hole of the hot economic fire. According to Dr. Nouriel Roubini, such a move has been assumed because of some few factors, or let's say economic viruses, that have infringed on this economic game. Talk about kinds of stuff like the mother of all debt crises, the currency meltdowns, border closings and deglobalization, AI and job destruction, the new Cold War, the climate catastrophe and global pandemics, the demographic time bomb, the bailout trap, the stagflation, and the easy money trap leading to cycles of booms and busts, have all impacted negatively to our economic health. The global pandemic, an active war in Europe, and escalating tensions between the world's two largest economies have made governments and corporations become more careful about whom they trade with and where they set up their supply chains. In the past 3 years, companies have been having a lot of problems getting supplies to complete products. Before then, the supply of goods and services to any market followed the most efficient way of a just-in-time approach. This is where the goods and services are produced and delivered at the very moment they are demanded. A concept that sounds pretty simple enough in theory, but it has become incredibly difficult because a lot of the products that we take for granted have components from dozens of countries. The global pandemic and a series of large economic shocks like the war in Ukraine, Brexit, and ongoing trade tensions have made coordinating this fragile system look impossible. So what's next? Governments and companies have had to adopt a just-in-case strategy, where they order enough goods and services in advance to run their operations no matter what happens. The new method of operation is not something simple, but more expensive than the just-in-time previously used. This is simply a cost that most companies are willing to pay, and payment is not by them, but by us as consumers, because the costs that are going to be passed along to the consumers will be higher prices. Another thing about this method of operation is that it is going to cause a loss of collaboration between countries, which means there will be less sharing of resources, technology, and everything else that has made this world a richer place in recent decades. And not that alone, this breakdown of global commerce is also drooling us down to the mother of all debt crises. The global public and private sector debt has grown from around 100% of global GDP in 1970 to 200% in 2000 to 250% today. Now, you might be thinking that the growing debt levels are actually going to lead the entire economic system to collapse. But you might be wrong. Countries like the United States can get away by maintaining a relatively high level of government debt because they control their own currency. The US dollar is also the world's reserve currency, which means that having a healthy level of debt allows large institutions and other governments to hold their reserves as government bonds instead of straight cash. Japan, for example, has trillions of US dollars in foreign currency reserves, but they don't keep those reserves as cash in a vault or even digits in a bank account, but keep those reserves as government bonds. These bonds are much easier to keep at that sort of scale, and they can even pay some interest, which is nice. Someone might ask, why did they not keep the US dollars in form of straight cash? Now, the reason here is simple. If the US government didn't have debt, then there wouldn't be government bonds, which would make it harder to use those US dollars as a medium of economic exchange, and it could potentially lead to international institutions looking for altercations that did have active debt markets. So that is why sometimes we can regard a debt as good or bad. It is also very hard to imagine that, apart from the USA and other advanced economies, there are a few countries that can't borrow money using their own money. We are talking about countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Well, for starters, we can call them economic zombies, or countries that are already in hell. But why? This is actually because these two nations have in the past taken on massive loans in American dollars and Chinese RMB, and then they temporarily lost their ability to receive those currencies from abroad. If you haven't seen the video we posted about Pakistan, please go and check it out. It holds broad content about Pakistan's failing economy that we won't discuss here. But again, we will also be soon posting about the failing economy of Sri Lanka. Just stay in check. It has also been found that the kind of borrowing in emerging economies has grown very significantly in the last 2 decades. This is because these economies also wanted to make vital investments into infrastructure and economic services, just to emulate the success of other highly developed nations. Again, you need to understand that it is not only the governments that are taking debt, but also businesses and households that are holding on to record amounts. For most economists, business debts have always been considered as a good type of debt because businesses normally take out loans if they think that they can use the money to make returns that are higher than the principal plus interest rate payments. But also, just like Pakistan and Sri Lanka and other zombie nations, we also have zombie companies that provide no real economic value to the global systems, but have kept a life simply because market conditions have been artificially kept so favorable. Such companies and emerging economies are exactly in the same group that is going to be hit hardest by a move away from globalization. Climate change is another economic threat that is also going to affect us all. But once again, it's likely to be the poorest nations and countries that are going to bear the brunt of the burden no matter how it plays out. To reduce emissions, we either need to make large investments in alternative energy sources and storage infrastructure, reduce output, or make even bigger investments into carbon capture technologies, or some really wide ideas, like space shades to block a small portion of sunlight rays from reaching the Earth. You shouldn't even think about telling poor nations to give up economic growth to control emissions. Neither should you even imagine if they can contribute to making large investments, because such is past them. Apart from climate change, we also have other factors, like the rise of technologies that could easily replace labor. Capital advancements like machinery and even robots are on a high rise currently, and many are speculating that the new technologies can completely emulate human labor, and the result is people redundancy in companies. Actually, nobody can predict the future of all economies. We just say that we leave it all to our economists to work out. But then, what can be done to stop this trend of economic slowdown? Please, don't forget to leave us your suggestions in the comment box below. This brings us to the end of our video today. If you enjoyed watching, kindly don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified about the weekly videos that we will be uploading. Thank you for watching, and let's meet in our next video.